For years, we thought there was only one way to be a chef. But what if the industry just never showed us the other ones? You're listening to Fugitive Chefs, a podcast about what happens when chefs step outside the traditional kitchen path. I'm Furkan. I've worked in kitchens like Noma and Mugaritz, and today I work outside restaurants as a senior innovation chef at Kraft Heinz. Some episodes are conversations with chefs building new paths. Others are solo episodes where I try to make sense of what's changing in the industry. Today's episode is a bit of a special one because this is one of those rare moments where you meet someone building something very similar but from a completely different angle. Chris Peer is the host of Chefs Without Restaurants, a podcast and community, and he's been working outside traditional restaurant kitchens for over 20 years. From catering to hospitals to running his own personal chef business, his entire career has been built outside the classic fine dining path. And what's funny is we actually got connected through Justin Khanna, who was recently on our previous episode. So this conversation felt like it had to happen. So welcome to the podcast, Chris. It doesn't happen so often that you meet somebody else, who's doing things very similar to you. So yeah, first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's funny, right? Because Justin mentioned on the episode, like he mentioned about you, like once we closed, he was like, okay, do you know about Chefs Without Restaurants? And I was like, wow, that sounds so similar to what I do with Fugitive Chefs. And then I started going down the rabbit hole, seeing what you've done and what you've made. I mean, it's a massive. You've had around like more than 200 episodes. How much was that?
Yeah. So I'm at like 270 episodes. It started as a community. 2017, It was a community-based, we started as a Facebook group, and it grew really quickly, and soon, it steamrolled, and then now we have like almost 2,000 members. And as people are kind of leaving Facebook, I'm trying to, where do we go now? But the podcast was an extension that I started in 2019 to kind of interview some of these people who were in my community, and then just other cool people I wanted to talk to.
That's so cool. I'm gonna like try to dive down into it. How was that experience? How did that grow? Where is it today? What got you into it? But before we get into all of that, Chris, tell us about yourself. Like someone asks you randomly, what do you do for work? Well, how do you explain it?
So first and foremost, I'm a personal chef that does in-home dinner parties. So I know there's a lot of confusion about personal chef, private chef. What does that mean? I basically wanted to be more like a caterer, but doing small dinners. I have a varied background and I've done large-scale catering, but I want to basically, I say I bring the restaurant experience to you. So I do as little as 2 people, kind of max out around 20 people because I don't want to be using chafing dishes, pushing people through a line. I want to be able to have you in your home or your Airbnb, sit down. I'm at the table with silverware, linen napkins, and do a multi-course plated and served dinner. And I don't vary from that. I don't do drop-offs. I don't do buffets. I don't do family style. I like that, served dining experience. And that's something I started in 2010 as a side job. And 2016, I took it full time. So I'm coming up on 10 years.
Wow, that's an amazing journey, and especially the edge you bring to the podcast. I feel because over here at Fugitive Chefs, we are covering people from the R&D end, people who are doing catering, people who are doing like institutional catering for schools, for example. And then actually the first guest we had, Dani Lassa, who was a chef in Mugaritz, then made a brand himself, and he does something like a more like supper clubs. We've had people from many like private chef ends of it. So for me, it's very interesting because I feel a lot of these transitions that I talk about on the podcast can feel very difficult or can feel like, okay, you need a degree to it or there's a lot of academic baggage to it. Whereas I feel private chef on all the scales that you spoke about them could be an easier entry point. It has its own challenges. I guess that's why you have a community which is answering these questions. But it's still an easy entry point while you can have a full-time job at a restaurant and you try out on the weekends, right? So I will ask you questions more about that. But before that, Chris, because when I was reading about you and researching who Chris is, I've seen that you've spent your career in kitchens that are not really traditional restaurants already before what you do today. You did catering, hospitals. I saw IKEA somewhere. I saw you did stuff with retirement communities. So all these careers, when you were doing them, did they feel like you were chasing an alternative path? Or was it just what came up to you and that's what was available for you?
Yeah, a little mix. Go back to, I graduated culinary school. I went to Johnson & Wales. 4-year degree, great, but very expensive. And I came out of school, my student loan repayment in the late 90s was $404 a month for 10 years. That's what I owed. And then even with my degree, places were offering me like $9 an hour and no benefits, and a local retirement community was having a job fair and they were looking for like a not quite a sous chef, but kind of like a lead with the potential to grow.
Okay.
And they offered me a very competitive pay, much more than any restaurant. But then there was also the draw of 2 weeks vacation, 401k, medical benefits, many things you don't see in traditional restaurants. And then I had every other week off. And when I worked nights, it was like till 8 o'clock. So it was like, okay, this sounds good. And I just started doing that. And I moved to Seattle, Washington afterwards. My wife and I moved out there and I started interviewing, and none of the restaurant jobs worked out. But then there was a retirement committee that was looking for an executive chef. So that was my first executive chef job. The director there was a Johnson & Wales grad, so that helped get me in the door. And that just kind of started this path to alternate types of kitchen work, which, I went to culinary school and I thought, I'm going to get out, I'm going to be an executive chef or at least a sous chef at some restaurant or resort. I graduated in 98. And at the time, the idea of like being a personal chef wasn't really a thing. But also, they didn't tell us about contract food service work or anything like that when I was in school. I don't remember anyone saying like, yeah, you can be a caterer in a hospital or you can cook in a retirement community. That's not what they were talking about. And that just tended to be my path. And as I moved around, I started in those types of jobs, and they can be fulfilling. I mean, every industry has its ups and downs, right? But I think a lot of chefs self-identify like they identify as a chef, and cooking in a hospital means you're not a real chef. Like, and this is something I've heard from a lot of people, and it's all on them. They internalize that, right? They meet someone at a dinner party and they say, "What do you do?" And you tell them, "I'm a chef." And you see like the glimmer in their eye and they get excited and say, "Oh, where?" And you're like, well, it's at the hospital. And then it's just kind of like this letdown. And maybe I'm putting that on and it's not really there. But I think a lot of people who do that kind of work don't, I don't know. It can be rewarding and it can be amazing. But I think a lot of people kind of want to work in, Michelin star type restaurants to say that they've worked in Michelin star type restaurants.
Exactly. No, I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying. And actually, this came up with a recent episode. I was interviewed on a different podcast by Jeff Fell, and we had this chat like how much of like many of my episodes, which are solo ones, that focused on like why what is happening. And I totally agree with you. I feel culinary schools, you enter them with a student loan and baggages. Everybody has their own places, like ways to enter these schools, and then they give you a program which only shows very limited paths. And there's not much talk about how are you going to pay, how are you going to repay the amount of student loan? And even if it's not a student loan, how am I going to make this degree worth, or make you like a 5-year plan? Once you step out of here, this is how you make money. And the second quote, which I can't stop quoting enough, is Dan Giusti, also from the United States. And he was on the podcast and he said like, it's very funny and ironic that we put the most value to the people who serve the least people with the most amount of money, and not the other way around. The people who are serving with very little budgets, school caterings, institutional caterings, the armies, navies, feeding a lot of people at scale with nutrition and all of these other components that a fine dining kitchen doesn't have to care about. So that I think, this is very much, I feel this is a role of you and I of like highlighting these careers, what we are both doing with our podcast. I hope that if schools are not filling this role of showing people what else is out there, I hope people listening and at least the younger generation has technology and access to media and all these platforms to be able to understand, okay, there's many more ways to be able to kind of draw this path.
Yeah, and we talk about being in the hospitality industry and wanting to take care of people, but on the higher end, a lot of these people, they just seem a little entitled and could almost care less. Like they're at this restaurant because they want to say they've been to this restaurant, but I again have worked in retirement communities. Like I cooked someone's last meal before they died, right? Like they were on hospice in a retirement community and they knew it was going to be any day, and the family came in and we actually took one of the boardrooms in our community because they wanted to have like 10 people and they couldn't do it in his room or take him to the dining room. That's a thing, right? Like, what does this person want? He's going, his family's going to tell you what that dream ideal meal would be. And then you cook it for him. And then in like 2 days, they're no longer here. Like, to me, that's a whole other level than cooking for someone who has thousands of dollars to fly across the world to eat a 19-course meal just to say they did it.
Yeah, it's a checklist. And I mean, it's also, I feel a lot of it, it's my personal opinion, I feel a lot of it is because I feel when I talk in my community, which is a bunch of people who are in restaurants and are looking for how can they make this pivot, I feel when I speak to a lot of them when they enter the community in the earlier stages, a lot of them speak about like they aspire careers like you and I, where they can have their own hours, where they can have their purpose, where it's not very stressful, where they are not feeding people who they cannot identify with. There's a social set of people who's just checking places off, taking pictures outside doors of Alchemist or Noma, whatever that is. And they aspire the careers we have, but they somehow have been sold the idea that you can only have it once you've gone through the suffering. So I feel, why are we, I don't know where does it get. I don't know if it's partly media, things like The Bear, or even before, like Kitchen Confidential, things like that. Is it that's what's creating this image that you will reach a part of your career where you own a restaurant, which I think is no easier than being in a very shitty restaurant. So owning is not the path to making your life easier, but they somehow relate that if I go through a lot of suffering, the end result will be something I will enjoy. So I mean, that's what I think where people should focus on, that okay, maybe just put your things down. As you said, your partner moved, or you wanted to make some certain amount of money every month. I feel that should be your career like standpoints. Okay, this is what I need, and this is how I can get it, rather than saying this is what I need. I saw Anthony Bourdain got it and he was traveling the world with Parts Unknown, and this is what he did, so should I just copy what he did? I mean, that makes no sense. Our realities are so different. Everybody needs to see what's on their table, right? And on that note, Chris, what I was reading is that in 2016, if I'm wrong, correct me, that you made this jump to go fully independent as a personal chef. So having coming from these backgrounds, what made you think that okay, personal chef is the most logical move for you next?
Yeah, well, when you move up in the corporate chef world, you're not cooking anymore. And I love cooking.
Right.
And you hear this from many people in different industries that like you start doing what you love and you're the practitioner. And then as you move up, you're no longer doing that. And it's, I enjoy being a mentor. I love that. But when you come in and every day I'm in the office and I'm scheduling, hiring, firing, evals, board meetings, inventory, ordering. It's been a month and I haven't touched food. Like I'm an office manager, but I'm an underpaid office manager. Like if I wanted to sit behind a desk all day, I'd go work in not a food industry and get paid at least twice as much. Like,
100%.
what am I doing here? And I tinkered with this a little bit. I worked for a catering company 20 years ago, and they only did big events, but they would have a lot of requests for these small dinners. Like, can you come do this dinner party for 8 people? And it's not worth it if you're a big catering company, like doing big events, but they had enough requests that finally they just kind of said, hey, would you want to do this? Like you can use our kitchen, keep all the money, but just represent our business. And maybe it'll be good lead gen to get, that customer's daughter's 200 person wedding. And I just did it for a couple months. But it was always in my head. And I just kept saying to my wife, like, could I essentially be a caterer cooking for like 2 to 20 people and creating the food that I love? So in 2010, I started the process. I actually joined the Personal Chef Association to kind of learn some of the logistics and started to get there. And then in 2012, my wife got pregnant with twins and we're like, hey, maybe like don't quit your job. Because again, I worked for so, good pay, good benefits. And the conversation was, she's going back to work for the foreseeable future. Not only do I need a reliable, stable income, but the benefits. But that gave me an additional runway of 4 years or so of side hustling to really refine my thing. So
Nice.
I could position myself in a certain way. And I wanted to position myself as the high end. So, when you a job and you have no customers and no income, you take a lot of whatever you can get. And I feel like, I understand why people do it, and you're not branding as anything. I have someone I know who has tried to do what I do, but I think, they'll also take a box lunch at the doctor's office. And,
Okay.
and then that's your marketing, that's your branding. And I never wanted to get into that. It's like, here's what I do. I do multi-course plated and served dinners for this many people. And if your budget's $30 a head, I'm not for you. And because I had a full-time job, I could turn those down. So maybe I was doing 1 dinner a month, 2 dinners a month, but I did that for those additional years to build up a clientele, to figure out what works, what didn't work. So I had a lot of, like many people don't side hustle for like 6 years or whatever. But I did, and that was to my benefit.
100%. I'm a believer of that. Like a lot of people I speak to, and a lot of people it's very funny because stories like yours all of them speak about like not going all in, because I feel this going all in has been sold so much by people who have been privileged or have been in a position where they could go all in, that today the listener doesn't relate with that. Like, okay, I cannot go all in because I have, say, bills to pay, I have parents to take care of, I have children, I have these responsibilities. So I feel it's a very smart move, I think, and that's why I said the private chef business is where you can afford to do this, and it's actually good because possibly you're producing stuff at the restaurant, possibly you are getting instant feedback from customers, you know what trends are like, you know, I mean, you can depend so much on that knowledge that you're gaining at the restaurants, and then serve and fight for that like creative freedom, and you don't have the baggage of, I mean, to make enough money to be able to sustain, right?
I did R&D at my job for essentially 6 years, right? Like, because, and I was at a retirement community. We had 750 residents and 4 dining venues. I mean, there was literally 80 different things a day, right? So I got to try everything because we had 2 informal cafes and 2 formal dining rooms, and each dining room had a ton of stuff. So I'm getting to try a whole bunch of things. So I'm thinking like, I want to try like a pork dish. Let's get in some pork shoulder. And then I'm just, trying a bunch of different things. So when I started my business, I was ready. Like, I had my recipes down for so much stuff. And if you know, I don't have employees, but I have some people who help me. And one of them is a guy who used to be like my sous chef. And it's great because he knows where most of these recipes came from. And my customer changes literally every dinner party, so I don't have to change my menus that often. Like, I change them when I get bored, and I base them around your preferences somewhat. But like, I always have a crab cake on my menu because that's what we have here in Maryland. And I got that recipe ratcheted down that I've never changed it in the 10 years I've been doing my business. And every single person who wants a party, it's on one of the suggested items,
I mean, that's so cool. And there's other layer. Like, now that you mentioned this, I remember when I was in Mugaritz, there was the R&D chef who was partly doing something like, it's like a secret supper club. Nobody knows the location. It's invite only. And what he was doing is a lot of ingredients that Mugaritz gets. They get calls from the fish purveyor. I've got 3 of these. Can you buy? Mugaritz says, no, I buy 2. And then he's not hurting the restaurant, but he said, you know what, Andoni, can I buy 1? Because he's giving something super exclusive to diners who are paying him a bill on a post-it note. There's no format to it. So, I mean, there's other layers of purveyors, the prices you can get, the things you can stock, the deals you can get. I feel it's very cool. I feel it's inspirational to listen to you that you've done it in practice. And I think this is what people sometimes listening, they feel that, okay, it's not possible because there's not enough examples. What I feel sad is that podcasts like yours are very good at setting these examples. Okay, this person did it, so maybe it has worked for somebody. They got lucky. So I might just get lucky,
And I think we have to be honest, especially as a podcaster who's, I'm kind of like talking about this industry. I think a lot of people don't want to talk the truth. And I think part of it is in the social media age, everyone wants to look successful, right? And I talk a lot about cottage bake because I know a lot of people, them. They're making cookies or breads or whatever, and they have an Instagram and and it looks great, and they're doing all this. But they're working full-time 40 hours a week at a doctor's office or somewhere else because they can't support themselves. But what they're doing online is they're making it look like it's a successful business that you can live off of. I think that does a disservice to someone who's working in an office and says, oh, this person quit their job and they're making cookies. I can do the same thing. I don't really know that person could never live off that. And I want people to come on the show and talk about that, like talk about money, the realities of, I'll be real. It's the end of March. Where I'm at year to date right now financially is where I was just in January of last year. Last year, best year ever. This year, I'm not 3 months in. I'm not even financially where I was in January. Like, something fell off, and that's scary. And like, that's the reality. And I could easily just say like, yeah, last year was the best year financially and put a period on it. But I also need to say, yeah, this year is like really not good. And like, what do I do? So really getting people to open up on the show about that and the realities of like the challenges.
No, 100%. I feel it's super important to also like make these intimate communities, intimate conversations where also like people like you and I who are reachable and who you can see, they're present and they're also in the industry. So I think that makes it also, they puts those barriers down of not having, I don't know, influencers who are doing 10,000 layers of things and you can't reach them, or you create these scenarios which you mentioned where it looks all very, very easy to get. So leading on to that, Chris, a lot of chefs that I speak to say that they want freedom, and paths like these can look like freedom because you get to choose your own menu. There's nobody saying, okay, you can't put this on the menu. You're deciding who can be there or not. You're deciding the price for it. You're deciding who to work with or not. So there is that layer of freedom, right? But what does it actually look like as somebody who's a one person business? Say, what is it like, the freedom that people seek? If this is something you've been thinking about lately, feeling stuck, questioning your path, you're exactly why I started this podcast. And if you've been enjoying these conversations, the best way to support the show is simple. Follow it, rate it, or share it with someone who might need to hear this. It genuinely helps more chefs find these conversations.
It depends on a few different things. One is how many people are going to work with you, because it's not freedom. It's free to do a lot of things, but I have no one who works with me, right? So I'm doing all the customer reach. I'm doing all the marketing. I'm doing all the social media stuff. But I'm answering every email. I'm planning all the menus. I'm doing all the shopping. Like, is that freedom? Like, I said I left my corporate job because I didn't want to be in an office, but now I'm in an office and I'm cooking. And that means that, like, there's a lot of 15-hour days here. It's not freedom always. Like I said, I'm going to quit this job that doesn't have flexibility so I can be home with my family all the time. But now I'm in a business that is very much every weekend. When I worked a corporate job, at least I had every other weekend off. Now I pretty much have to work at least every Saturday night, quite often every Friday night. So, it's freedom in a different sense. The same with creating the menu, but how accommodating do you want to be towards a customer? Because going back to, like, I need money, I need customers. I was very ambitious with my menu. Sure, I would love to have let's talk about mugaritz, like that type of food. Like, I thought, yeah, I'm going to be a private chef and do all that. Like, that's like half a percentage of the people who want it. The challenge is then you got people whose favorite restaurant is the Olive Garden, and that's what they want. And I don't want to do that. So, like, how do I figure out where I'm not making either food? Like, I'm not full of doing mugaritz and they don't want that, but I'm also not making chicken parmesan. So, you can be rigid and say, this is my menu and my style, but also, there's the customer aspect of, you tell them you do a custom menu for them. So are you really doing a custom menu for them?
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to it. And I mean, in terms of self-learning, Chris, what has that been like? I mean, the journey from, like, switching into private chef, I would say, what were the things that you had to learn that had nothing to do with cooking? I don't know, pricing, clients, admin stuff. What was those few things that people should look out for?
See, I think you need to know all that. And that's where having a big corporate background helped, coming from a Sodexo and an IKEA. I took those jobs, and a lot of friends kind of, poke fun a little, like, you're a chef, why are you going to work at IKEA? But, like, they're a global corporation, right? Like, they've got their marketing down, they've got their costing down, they have systems in place. I think that's really hard because a lot of people, they're, in a restaurant, they're maybe not the executive chef, but like a sous chef or a line cook. Maybe they've done some of this, maybe they've done none of it. If they're not hiring someone, they're doing it all. And what's their experience with that? And I think that's tough. The other thing is the hospitality angle. So many cooks get in the kitchen because they want to be behind the scenes. But if you're doing kind of what I do, like a 1-2 man show, like, you're in someone's house, you're on display. How do you roll with the punches? How do you react when you bring all your stuff in? Can you get it in and out in a quiet and neat fashion? Can you make it so the kitchen looks clean and organized and not like a bomb went off? Like, I bring in 15 bins, but I need to get that unpacked, organized, and then, like, back out into the hallway or the car really quickly. And then entertaining. I'm cooking and there's a bunch of people and they're talking to you and what are you making and how do you doing? And then there's like maybe a kid there or a dog on the, in the area. Like, I don't think everyone can do that and be genuinely warm and funny and cook. And I don't know that you can even teach that. You can just tell people that to expect that that's what the expectation is.
Yeah, I mean, cooks are not the most social people. I mean, it's changing after the newer generation, but in general, cooks, many of them get in the profession to stay away from people. That's also very ironic because it's in the service industry, but a lot of people find their solace there within their community of cooks, but they speak cook language, which is not very pleasant to speak with a normal diner, right? And for you, Chris, like, what, for someone who has no idea, because you walked us through some steps of your things that you do, right? So just dive us into what is your week like. I bet no 2 weeks are the same for you because they are such different kind of people and their demands. But what does a normal week in your life look like for somebody to listen and say, maybe this fits into my aspiration of a future?
Well, I'm definitely weekend heavy for parties, so the beginning of the week has to be like admin type stuff. So if I, have to finish doing customer emails, menus, then start looking at grocery lists, what am I shopping, what can I get when, and then, when am I pulling things? So if I've got a Wednesday off and the party's Friday, Saturday, like that's a day where I'm pulling plates and everything and ironing napkins and getting that ready. And then just, toggling in the prep there. But for me, I'm finding like minutes. Like I have
Hmm.
twins that right now they're in soccer, so they both play every night. Someone's got soccer, but
Damn.
where they're practicing, the library is 3 minutes away, and they have Wi-Fi. So for me now, it's like I take them to practice, and I go to the library. So instead of getting up at in the morning and doing customer emails and menus, I've just had to shift my schedule where like now I have to do other things like maybe prep or shopping and drop them off at soccer to the library. And now I'm doing emails and menu planning at the end of the day. So,
Hmm.
being flexible with my schedule. But it's definitely heavy on the communication and outreach and having a system because I could have four people reach out today about parties. Now, that's not to say they're all viable. Some might want a dinner for $30 a person. Some might on a day that it's, I'm not available. But having a system where I'm logging all of the communication that comes in and then keeping, like, I have a Excel spreadsheet. So it's like dates. So it's like you reached out to me on this date. You want a party in this, here's your budget, whatever. And that way, if I don't get back to you, but then every time I communicate, I put that date. So it keeps me on track. Like, okay, he reached out on this date. I sent the first email on this day. So then going and saying like, oh, I sent him the questionnaire to fill out on this date and he never did. So now I've got to like, prompt you, like reach out via email, text, because it's
Hmm.
so easy to get lost. I think the biggest thing, I've lost jobs. Like the reality is people have reached out and wanted a dinner party and I'm busy and I think they're going to wait 2 days and 2 days later I get back to them and they're like, hey, I haven't heard from you in 2 days. I found someone else. Like, and
Yeah.
that sucks. It hurts, but like, yeah, totally. So being able to keep myself on track. So there's a lot of me looking at just all my communications. Where am I with everyone in the process?
Yeah, a lot of systems in place, right? I mean, and that's the work you're doing with Chefs Without Restaurants. You're speaking to a lot of chefs in similar situations like yours. And from that, what are you seeing right now? Is there any highlight you want to share with like this community of people that you're with? Why are so many chefs looking for something else? What is the main driver for these people?
Well, I do think it's like we had touched on like creative freedom and
Hmm.
flexibility. I think a lot of people think that's what they're getting.
Right.
And then they soon find out like it's a little bit, but not as much as they think. Everyone at some point gets tired of working for someone or maybe having employees. Like that was hard for me. I had 100 people, more than 100 people in my department under me. And that's a lot. And not everyone wants to do that forever either, leading huge teams. And I think sometimes people just get burned out from that and they're like, I just want to go work by myself. But then they realize like I'd actually be more successful if I had at least a couple people with me. And that's what I start to see is people building their teams up more. And I'm not really there yet. Again, I have a lot of part-time people, but one of the things I see is most people start out on their own and then they're like, service would be a little if I brought one more person to just handle service, or if I brought one more person as like a porter dishwasher person, or, hand off some of the marketing to someone. So I think there's a lot of bootstrapping and people get in with like not a lot of financial resources or they're trying to
Hmm.
take a bigger chunk of profitability. And then they realize like you've got to give a little bit more back so that you can grow.
Yeah, and this shift that you're seeing from people, say, looking at models like yours, outside the traditional restaurant which was sold to us in culinary schools or wherever that was, do you see this as a temporary shift? Is it just happening right now because of how things are? It's something deeper that's changing within the industry where the next generation of schools and people teaching these courses have to make it real that it's not limited to it. So is it a temporary shift? Is it something that's deeper than that?
No, I think there are more options and I think people are more aware of that. I've heard you speak about like R&D. R&D sounds so cool.
Hmm.
Nobody ever presented that to me. And I think the more that we're out speaking about the different angles in the industry, it gets more people interested because many of these careers have existed for a long time. We just weren't talking about it. Um, and, obviously there's a lot of talk right now about kitchen culture, things happening in kitchens, whether staging or downright abuse or pay or any of that stuff, right? We're all talking about that. We know what's going on. That kind of thing potentially scares off people. And if
Yeah.
you love food and cooking, I don't want you to be scared off from the industry as a whole. Like I realized for me very early on, like restaurants were probably not my thing, but I loved food and cooking. So how could I find a way to be in that industry and cook food and feel fulfilled, but not have all that stuff that comes along with working in a traditional restaurant. I love eating in restaurants, but cooking in them, it never actually was really my thing, which is funny that I spent so much money to go to culinary school thinking I was going to open a restaurant.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, connecting to that, I mean, this identity issue that we spoke about earlier, right? Like people judging, like I'm Kraft Heinz now since the past 2 months, and that makes ketchup at the end of the day. We just bought like ketchup flavored with pickle just to try what new they have in the market. So how is that for you? Like you said, there's a lot of people saying that okay, that's not chef enough for that job. Why are you a chef within IKEA? Whereas when I look at IKEA, I look at the cases they have done with the baking mat, with recipes on how you can cook with the cooking oven paper and all the innovation that goes behind the consumer understanding. That's something very attractive to me personally. How like big corporate brands think on how a consumer will act and then use culinary knowledge to transfer that into a product. But how has that worked for you now? Like, do you feel that has changed? Because for me in the beginning, for example, it was completely wrong. Like, why would you work for a big food company which is doing all the things wrong and they're backed by Berkshire Hathaway and like big companies? How was that for you? Did you struggle with identity or has it resolved now?
Yeah, and I think maybe that's just like a age and maturity thing, right? We're all like that. You want to seem cool or like that you're
Mm-hmm.
working in a hot place, like it makes you feel important. But I've never really been one of those people to keep up appearances. Like I don't care what my car is, like I don't care if my lawn isn't mowed the same way as all the neighbors. Like I've never really cared about that. So, for me it's like quality of life over everything else. Like I I met my wife when we were like I was just out of culinary school and she was still in there. Like I wanted to have a life with people. Like you see so many people who are burned out, divorced, maybe they have kids but they don't get to see their kids. Like I don't
Mm-hmm.
know what. So you can cook in a restaurant. So just above all else, I wanted to make sure that I had that work-life balance. I know that's a hard thing to talk about,
Mm.
but I wanted some balance. I didn't want my career to be my whole life. Like I started working at 16 in kitchens. I don't need that to be like my only thing. And I think a lot of people, it's their sole identity. It was almost sad to me when COVID hit, seeing so many people online, like on Twitter or Instagram, like they almost didn't know what to do because that was their whole life. And like when they were going into kitchens, it's like, I have so many hobbies. Like I've got tons of stuff to do. And it
Right.
was a little sad to me to see these people who like that seemed to be their whole identity and they had no idea, no purpose, no interest, nothing. And their kitchens were closed.
Yeah, I think it's a loop. I feel it's a loop somehow when you again, I think it's a very much relation to the identity because when something is your identity and you sign up to it and sign up publicly, you tell your friends and family and then they have an image of what a chef is and then you're trying to just fulfill the identity of what you think a chef should be, what they think a chef should be and never really questioning, well, I'm paying this amount of money to go to culinary school or not. This is the kind of life I want to have. Maybe I want to have kids tomorrow. And today you can, like in your case, today you can switch your email timings to be evening and not morning. I mean, you could not do that in a restaurant. If the restaurant there's a service happening in the evening, you have to be there. You have to be present. Whereas in your life, the one you have designed, it's not easy for sure. As you say, your weekends are busy and they're heavy, but at least you're on the driving seat and you're driving those decisions towards and if something's happening, the benefits of it is going towards you and towards the same family rather than into deeper pockets of things not connected to you. So I think that's the takeaway. And I feel it's what I see from your journey as an outsider and listening to your journey. I feel the key points have been, of course, there have been things that have happened because of, say, your partner moving or something's happening around your environment, but also being very aligned with, as you said, for you, the identity was not a crisis. It wasn't the thing that you have to stick to a title or a name or looking or fitting the character rather than just, you're having a reality of having a real student loan and, okay, this is what it needs. A restaurant won't give it. Who could give it? And seeing that. So I feel that's been inspiring for me to listen. But if there's any chef listening to you right now, Chris, who feels stuck but doesn't know what to do next, like as you were in that position, I guess, right? When you did this first few stints of, let me try my hands at private chef. What do you think would help that person right now? What could they hear from you that could possibly help them and think a little more positive? Because it's these loops where you said where people feel like they don't have hobbies because the restaurant business is such that you don't have time to build anything else. So what could help that person who's possibly investing an hour to listen to this podcast?
Well, I definitely say community, and that doesn't have to be like my community, but like Chefs Without Restaurants, I've said started because, I worked in a big operation. I had a lot of peers and people to bounce ideas off of. I think a lot of us love that creative energy. And then literally overnight, I had none of that. It's like I walked out on my last day where I had, 100 people, employees, and then like the next day there is just me, right? And I didn't really know what I was doing. I was making up as I went along. And then I started to find people who were doing similar things. We're grabbing coffees, beer, we're talking through some of those challenges. And it just turned to an online community where we could scale that out, if you will, where, I'm picking the brains of 20 people and then 100 and so forth. And that's, I think it's really important. It's always interesting because one of the things I like about not having employees, everyone I hire for the most part is doing something like me. Like I'll hire someone who has a catering company or a food truck or another personal chef on their days off. And they'll tell you, oh, like, that's interesting that you do that because I do it like this. And then maybe I'll go work with them. So it's almost like staging, if you will, except you're getting paid.
Right.
But finding a community, if that's something that's realistic. So you're still, staying on top of things. And I don't want to call it trends, but, like I've got a friend who does a lot of catering and she's very much into the design aesthetic, which is not my thing at all. But I'll go and see something like, oh, like every single, because she does catering and everything's in chafing dishes, like everything has like a little metal stand with the name of what it is. And I don't do that because it's a dinner. But, we do have like an appetizer hour where I put out, let's just say, a bowl of hummus. Like, maybe there should be like a little thing that says that. Or, maybe I should be printing off and putting them on the table because I wasn't doing that, and then saying like, hey, like what kind of paper are you using, or where are you laminating this, and just picking things up from other people. So again, like having a community, even if it's just one or two people to talk to, maybe they're maybe they're even in a different industry. You can pick up a lot from. I have friends who are DJs or friends who are wedding photographers, like that. We're all kind of like freelancers, and like, what do you see? How are you acquiring customers? Because it's really the same. Like, how's someone finding you as a photographer for their wedding or the florist for their event? So, kind of getting in some kind of community. Join your local chamber of commerce, something like that.
No, super, super interesting. And I feel that people really underestimate the strength of just people getting together. And as you said, from different industries and also reaching out. I feel just being humble enough to ask the doubts you have. If there is somebody who's like, for example, Chris, I'll put all the links down to Chris, to Chefs Without Restaurants. It's real people who are easy to reach out, and I feel that's a real value of people understanding that there can be potential. I think it's innovative thinking, which I think you get this from the corporate world of seeing how multidisciplinary teams work, how people from different disciplines can contribute to each other. So I think that's a super valuable tip. I'm definitely gonna work on that as well. I think it's really cool to sit down with people who don't have things figured out, but just bouncing back and forth ideas of how are you doing that. So thank you so much, Chris. I really enjoyed this. I honestly think the conversation that we've just had is really important, and the ones you have on Chefs Without Restaurants, because I feel they show that knowledge that is missing from this education system, that there is just not one way to build a career in food. You can still be working in food, even if that's not something you were taught in your culinary school. So, and it's also interesting that we are both building something very similar. The conceptual idea is very similar to each other, and it's just from different directions. So I'm really glad Justin connected us, and thanks so much for taking time out to be on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, the best way to support the show is simple. Follow it, rate it, or share it with someone who might need to hear this. Fugitive Chefs is growing through word of mouth, and every share genuinely helps. I'll see you in the next episode.